They called it peak diversity when Captain Elena Rodriguez was assigned to Blackwater Air Force Base in Nevada. What they didn't know was that the quiet Latina pilot they dismissed as a quota hire would soon be the only thing standing between the base and complete annihilation when enemy aircraft appeared on the horizon. I'm Captain Elena Rodriguez, 32 years old, and I've been flying military aircraft for 12 years. My callsign is Viper, earned not through some dramatic combat story, but because of my precision in the cockpit and my ability to strike at exactly the right moment. I graduated top of my class from the Air Force Academy, completed advanced fighter training at Nellis, and logged over 2,000 flight hours in F-16s and F-22 Raptors across 3 deployments in the Middle East. My record speaks for itself: 0 incidents, commendations for tactical excellence, and a reputation among my squadron mates as someone who could thread a needle at Mach 2. But when I arrived at Blackwater AFB in March 2023, none of that seemed to matter. The base was home to the 47th Fighter Wing, an elite unit tasked with homeland defense and rapid response operations along the western coast. It was a prestigious assignment, the kind that could make or break a career. The base housed some of the most advanced aircraft in the Air Force inventory, including the newest F-35 Lightning, 2 fighters, and a small fleet of experimental drone interceptors that most pilots only dreamed of flying. My transfer to Blackwater came after my commanding officer at my previous base, Colonel Sarah Mitchell, specifically requested me for the position. She'd worked with me during the joint training exercise and was impressed by my ability to adapt quickly to new aircraft systems. "Rodriguez," she'd told me, "you have an intuitive understanding of aviation technology that I've rarely seen. The 47th needs someone with your skills." It was the kind of endorsement that should have opened doors, but instead it seemed to close them. The base commander, General Marcus Stone, was a 58-year-old career officer who'd earned his rank through decades of service and political maneuvering. He was known for his old-school approach to military leadership and his skepticism of what he called social experiments in the armed forces. During my arrival briefing, he made it clear that he hadn't requested my transfer and wasn't particularly enthusiastic about it. "Captain Rodriguez," he said, barely glancing at my service record, "I trust you understand the standards we maintain here at Blackwater. This isn't a training facility, and we don't have time for hand-holding." The message was clear. I was there to fill a diversity quota, not because of my qualifications. It didn't help that I was one of only 3 women pilots on the base, and the only Latina officer in the entire 47th Fighter Wing. The other pilots were polite but distant, treating me with the kind of careful professionalism that suggested they'd been briefed on proper behavior, rather than genuine acceptance. My assigned squadron leader was Lieutenant Colonel James Harrison, a 45-year-old pilot who'd been flying fighters since before I'd even joined the Air Force. Harrison was competent, but unimaginative, the kind of officer who followed procedures to the letter and expected others to do the same. He assigned me to the most basic patrol duties, keeping me away from the more complex missions that would have utilized my advanced training. "Let's see how you handle the fundamentals first," he said during our initial meeting, as if I were a fresh-faced lieutenant rather than a captain with combat experience. The other pilots in my squadron included Major Robert Kim, a talented but arrogant pilot who'd graduated from the same academy as me, but 3 years earlier, and Captain Michael Stevens, a good-natured Texan who was more interested in following the crowd than making waves. There was also Captain Lisa Chun, one of the other female pilots, who kept her head down and avoided anything that might draw attention to her gender or ethnicity. She'd warned me during my first week, "Don't give them any reason to say you can't handle it. They're looking for excuses." The base's operations center was staffed by some of the most skilled radar operators and air traffic controllers in the Air Force, led by Master Sergeant Patricia Williams, a 20-year veteran who knew every inch of airspace within 500 miles. She was one of the few people who seemed to judge me based on my performance rather than my demographics, but even she was careful to maintain professional distance. The enlisted personnel were respectful but cautious, clearly taking their cues from the officers above them. That my living quarters were in the bachelor officers' quarters, a modern facility that housed single officers and those whose families lived elsewhere. My neighbors were mostly younger pilots and support officers who nodded politely when we passed in the hallways, but rarely engaged in conversation. The base had a fitness center, a modest officers' club, and recreational facilities that I rarely used, preferring to spend my off-duty time studying technical manuals and flight procedures. The aircraft I was assigned to fly was an F-16C Fighting Falcon, a reliable but older model that was considered a step down from the F-35s that the senior pilots flew. The maintenance crew, led by Technical Sergeant Carlos Mendez, was professional and competent, but I could sense their skepticism. They'd worked with plenty of pilots who talked a good game, but couldn't deliver when it mattered. "Take care of her, Captain," Mendez said when he first showed me around the aircraft. "She's not the newest bird on the line, but she get the job done if you know what you're doing." What frustrated me most wasn't the obvious discrimination, but the waste of resources. The Air Force had spent hundreds of thousands of dollars training me on advanced systems and tactics, but I was being used as an overqualified patrol pilot. I'd completed specialized training in electronic warfare, air-to-air combat, and multi-platform integration, skills that were desperately needed as tensions with foreign adversaries continued to escalate. Instead, I was flying routine training, missions and standing alert duty for scenarios that would likely never materialize. The base's mission was critical to national security, protecting key infrastructure and population centers along the western United States. Intelligence briefings suggested that foreign powers were increasing their reconnaissance activities, testing response times and capabilities. There were rumors of advanced aircraft being developed by potential adversaries, planes that could challenge even our most sophisticated fighters. But despite these threats, the leadership seemed more concerned with maintaining the status quo than maximizing their available resources. The change began on a crisp Tuesday morning in late September when a convoy of black SUVs rolled through Blackwater's main gate. I was completing my pre-flight checklist on the F-16 when I noticed the unusual activity around the base operations center. Senior officers were moving with the kind of urgent purpose that suggested something significant was happening. But as usual, information didn't trickle down to my level. The convoy's passenger turned out to be Senator Patricia Hayes, the chairwoman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, accompanied by a delegation of Pentagon officials and defense contractors. Senator Hayes was known for her advocacy of military modernization and her pointed questions about defense spending effectiveness. Her visit wasn't scheduled on any public calendar, which meant it was either classified or politically sensitive. Within an hour of the delegation's arrival, every pilot on base received orders to report to the main briefing auditorium. General Stone stood at the podium, his usual stern expression replaced by something that looked almost like nervousness. Behind him was a large screen displaying the Air Force logo and the words Operation Diversity Initiative Assessment. "Ladies and gentlemen," General Stone began, his voice carrying across the packed auditorium, "we have distinguished visitors today who are here to observe our operations and assess our unit's capabilities. Senator Hayes and her team are conducting a comprehensive review of how diversity initiatives have impacted our operational readiness and effectiveness." I felt the eyes of several pilots turn toward me and the other minority officers in the room. This wasn't just a routine inspection. It was a politically charged evaluation that could affect military policy at the highest levels. The implications were clear. We were being put on display as examples of the military's commitment to diversity. Whether we wanted to be or not, Senator Hayes stepped forward. A woman in her early 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything. "I want to be clear about why we're here," she said. "There have been questions raised about whether diversity initiatives have strengthened or weakened our military capabilities. This base has been selected as a case study because of its recent personnel changes and its critical mission profile." The phrase "recent personnel changes" was obviously a reference to officers like me who had been assigned to the base as part of broader military diversity goals. I could feel the tension in the room as pilots shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison's jaw was visibly clenched, and I could see him glancing in my direction with barely concealed irritation. After the briefing, General Stone announced that the delegation would be observing various aspects of base operations over the next 3 days, including flight training exercises, mission planning sessions, and tactical simulations. "I expect every member of this wing to perform at the highest level," he warned. "The reputation of this base and the broader Air Force is at stake." The first day of observations was a carefully choreographed display of military precision. The delegation was shown the base's most impressive facilities, briefed on our most successful missions, and introduced to our most decorated pilots. Major Kim was selected to demonstrate advanced flight maneuvers in one of the F-35s, while Captain Stevens led a presentation on air-to-air combat tactics. I was assigned to routine administrative duties, effectively kept out of sight. During lunch at the Officers Club, I overheard a conversation between 2 Pentagon officials who were part of the delegation. "The numbers look good on paper," one was saying, "but we need to see how these diversity hires perform under pressure. A real test, not just parade ground demonstrations." His companion nodded. "The senator wants to see actual capability, not just political correctness. If these pilots can't handle real missions, we need to know before we expand these programs further." The conversation confirmed what I'd suspected. This wasn't really about assessing the base's overall capabilities. It was about determining whether officers like me belonged in elite units or if we were liability that looked good in congressional hearings, but compromised operational effectiveness. That evening, Lieutenant Colonel Harrison called a meeting of squadron leaders and senior pilots. I wasn't invited, but Captain Chun filled me in afterward. "They're planning something for tomorrow," she said, looking worried. "Harrison wants to demonstrate what he calls traditional excellence versus what he's calling experimental personnel integration." The meaning was obvious. They were going to set up scenarios designed to highlight the supposed superiority of the traditional pilot profile over the diversity initiatives that had brought officers like me to the base. It was a calculated political move disguised as operational assessment. The second day began with Senator Hayes and her team observing flight operations from the control tower. They watched as experienced pilots conducted training exercises, took notes on response times and communication protocols, and asked detailed questions about mission effectiveness. General Stone provided running commentary, emphasizing the years of experience and proven track records of his senior pilots. "Captain Rodriguez," Lieutenant Colonel Harrison approached me as I was reviewing weather reports in the squadron ready room. "You're scheduled for a training flight this afternoon. Basic air-to-air intercept scenario. Senator Hayes specifically requested to observe some of our newer pilots in action." The way he emphasized newer made it clear this wasn't about my actual experience level. This was about putting me on display as an example of a diversity hire, probably in a scenario designed to highlight any shortcomings. "What's the mission profile?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "Standard intercept protocol. You'll be working with Captain Stevens as your wingman. The target will be a simulated hostile aircraft played by Major Kim in the F-35. Nothing too complicated." Harrison's tone suggested he expected me to struggle with even this basic scenario. Word of the afternoons. Exercise spread quickly through the pilot community. By the time I was suiting up for the flight, I could sense the anticipation. This wasn't just another training exercise. It was a test with political implications. The other pilots were watching to see if I would validate their skepticism or prove them wrong. In the equipment room, Technical Sergeant Mendez checked my gear with unusual attention to detail. "Everything looks good, Captain," he said quietly. "Just fly the aircraft and trust your training. Don't let the politics get in your head." As I walked toward my F-16, I could see Senator Hayes and her delegation positioned in the control tower, with an excellent view of the flight line. General Stone was pointing in my direction, no doubt explaining my background and the significance of the exercise. I felt like a specimen under a microscope, but I'd been in situations like this before. The aircraft didn't care about politics, and neither did the laws of physics. The pre-flight briefing took place in a sterile conference room where the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison stood at the front with a tactical display showing the exercise parameters, but his usual methodical approach had been replaced by something that felt more like a setup than standard training. Today's exercise is designed to test intercept capabilities against a sophisticated adversary. Harrison began, clicking through slides that showed aircraft positions and engagement zones. "Captain Rodriguez, you'll be flying lead with Captain Stevens as your wingman. Your mission is to intercept and neutralize a hostile aircraft that has penetrated our airspace." The scenario seemed straightforward enough, but there were unusual elements that raised red flags. The intercept would take place at maximum range, pushing the limits of the F-16's radar capabilities. The target aircraft, flown by Major Kim in the F-35, would be using advanced stealth and electronic warfare tactics that were typically reserved for much more experienced pilots to handle. Most concerning was the compressed timeline. I would have less than 8 minutes to locate, track, and engage the target before it reached a simulated population center. "The rules of engagement are standard," Harrison continued, "but I want to emphasize that this exercise is being monitored at the highest levels. Precision and decisiveness are critical." He paused, making eye contact with me. "Any questions, Captain Rodriguez?" I studied the tactical display more carefully, noting the positioning of friendly forces and the predicted flight path of the hostile aircraft. Something about the scenario felt artificial, as if it had been designed to highlight specific challenges rather than provide realistic training. "Sir, the intercept geometry seems unusually complex for a standard training exercise. Is there additional intelligence about the target's capabilities?" "The target will be employing countermeasures consistent with current threat assessments," Harrison replied, which wasn't really an answer. "Your job is to adapt and overcome whatever challenges you encounter." Captain Stevens, who would be flying as my wingman, looked uncomfortable with the whole situation. He was a competent pilot but preferred straightforward missions where the parameters were clearly defined. "Colonel, what's our backup plan if the primary intercept fails?" he asked. "There's no backup plan," Harrison said firmly. "Success or failure rests entirely on Captain Rodriguez's ability to execute the mission as briefed." The implication was clear. This was a test of my individual capabilities, not a team exercise. If I failed, it would be seen as evidence that diversity initiatives were compromising operational effectiveness. If I succeeded, it could be dismissed as luck or attributed to the simplicity of the scenario. After the briefing, I had 30 minutes to review technical data and flight plans before suiting up. In the squadron-ready room, I pulled up detailed specifications for the F-35 stealth and electronic warfare capabilities. Major Kim was one of the most skilled pilots on the base, and he wouldn't make this easy just because there were observers watching. The F-35's stealth technology made it nearly invisible to conventional radar until it was dangerously close, and its electronic warfare suite could jam or spoof most targeting systems. In a real combat situation, multiple aircraft would work together to counter these advantages, but this exercise was structured as a single ship intercept. I would be flying essentially blind until the last possible moment Captain Chun found, and me reviewing radar patterns and countermeasure protocols. "Elena, this isn't a fair fight," she said quietly, glancing around to make sure we weren't overheard. "They've stacked the deck against you. That intercept profile is something we'd normally assign to our most experienced pilots using our best equipment." "I know," I replied, continuing to study the technical manuals, "but complaining about it won't change anything. I have to work with what I've got. Your F-16 is good, but it's not designed for this kind of mission against a fifth-generation fighter. Kim knows that, and he's going to exploit every advantage." Chun's concern was genuine, and it reflected the broader understanding among the pilots that this exercise was more about politics than training. As I suited up in the equipment room, Technical Sergeant Mendez made final adjustments to my helmet and flight suit. "Captain, I've been working on fighters for 15 years, he said, while checking my oxygen connections. "I've seen a lot of pilots come and go, and I can tell you that the aircraft doesn't care about your background. It responds to skill and confidence." "Thanks, Sergeant. How's the bird today?" I asked, referring to my assigned F-16. "She's running perfect. All systems green, full fuel load, and I personally checked every connection twice." Mendez paused, then added, "Captain, the F-35 has advantages, but the F-16 is a fighter pilot's aircraft. Trust your instincts and don't try to fight their fight." Walking to the aircraft, I could see Senator Hayes and her delegation positioned in the control tower with an excellent view of the entire operation. General Stone was gesturing toward my F-16, no doubt explaining the significance of the exercise and what it meant for future military personnel policies. I tried to block out the political implications and focus on the mission at hand. The F-16 looked small and somewhat outdated compared to the sleek F-35 that Major Kim would be flying, but I knew its capabilities intimately. Every switch, every system response, every performance characteristic was familiar to me. The aircraft had been designed in an era when pilot skill mattered more than advanced automation, and that might actually work in my favor. As I completed the external inspection, I noticed that several other pilots had gathered on the flight line to watch the exercise. This was unusual for a routine training mission, confirming that word had spread about the political significance of what was happening. Some faces showed skepticism, others curiosity, but all of them were clearly invested in the outcome. The tower controller's voice crackled through my headset as I strapped into the cockpit. "Viper 1, you're cleared for engine start. Weather is clear, winds light and variable. Be advised that this exercise is being monitored by senior leadership." Even the air traffic controllers were aware that this was more than just another training flight. I ran through my pre-start checklist with methodical precision, ensuring that every system was functioning perfectly. There would be no room for mechanical failures or procedural errors in this exercise. Major Kim's voice came over the radio from his F-35. "Viper 1, this is Ghost Lead. Ready to give our visitors a good show today?" His tone was friendly, but carried an undercurrent of confidence that suggested he was looking forward to demonstrating the superiority of his aircraft and his own skills. "Copy that, Ghost Lead. May the best pilot win," I replied, keeping my response professional but letting him know I wasn't intimidated. The engine startup sequence proceeded flawlessly, the familiar whine of the F-16's turbofan building to a steady roar as all systems came online. I completed my final systems checks while monitoring radio chatter from the control tower, where I could hear General Stone providing commentary to the visiting delegation about standard operating procedures and pilot capabilities. "Viper 1, you are cleared to taxi," came the instruction from ground control. As I rolled toward the active runway, I caught sight of Captain Stevens in the adjacent F-16 that would serve as my wingman. His aircraft looked pristine in the afternoon sunlight, but I could see the tension in his body language even from a distance. This exercise was putting pressure on everyone involved. The takeoff was smooth and by the book, both aircraft lifting off in formation and climbing to our assigned altitude of 25,000 feet. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly below us, broken only by mountain ranges and the occasional military installation. It was perfect flying weather with unlimited visibility, which meant there would be no environmental factors to blame if things went wrong. Viper flight, contact Blackwater approach on 127.3. The tower controller instructed, handing us off to the radar controllers who would manage the exercise. I switched frequencies and checked in, receiving confirmation that Major Kim had already departed in his F-35 and was proceeding to the exercise area under simulated hostile conditions. The first 20 minutes of the flight were routine positioning, getting both aircraft to the proper starting coordinates for the intercept scenario. During this time, I reviewed the tactical situation in my head, considering various approaches to the problem. The F-35's stealth capabilities meant I wouldn't see it on radar until it was relatively close. But there were other ways to detect and track an aircraft if you knew what to look for. Viper 1, this is Control, came the voice of Master Sergeant Williams from the radar facility. Exercise commences in 60 seconds. Your target is currently bearing 280 degrees, range unknown, altitude unknown. Good luck, the formal start of the exercise meant that Major Kim was now officially playing the role of a hostile aircraft, attempting to penetrate American airspace. From this point forward, all communications would be monitored and recorded for later analysis by Senator Hayes and her team. Every decision I made would be scrutinized for evidence of competence, or failure. I immediately began a series of radar sweeps across the predicted intercept zone, but as expected, the F-35 stealth technology made it virtually invisible. My radar screen showed empty sky, despite the fact that I knew there was a highly advanced fighter aircraft somewhere out there. This was exactly the kind of technological disadvantage that the exercise seemed designed to highlight. Viper 2, maintain separation and prepare for combat spread. I instructed Captain Stevens, positioning our aircraft to cover the maximum amount of airspace. If I couldn't see the target directly, I would have to use indirect methods to locate it. The key insight came from my training in electronic warfare tactics. While the F-35 was invisible to radar, its own sensors were still active, and those emissions could potentially be detected by specialized equipment. My F-16 wasn't equipped with the most advanced electronic surveillance systems, but it had enough capability to detect strong electromagnetic signatures if I knew where to look. I began a systematic search pattern, using passive sensors to scan for any electronic emissions that might indicate the presence of the hostile aircraft. It was a technique that required patience and precise flying, maintaining steady headings and altitudes while the sensors gathered data. Captain Stevens maintained his position in the formation, providing backup radar coverage and visual scanning. Viper 1, Control. Be advised that your target has accelerated and is now approximately 12 minutes from the protected zone. Master Sergeant Williams reported. The clock was ticking, and I still hadn't made contact with the target aircraft. Then I caught it, a brief electronic signature at the edge of my detection range, lasting only a few seconds, but consistent with an F-35's radar system. The bearing was slightly north of where I had expected, suggesting that Major Kim was using a more indirect approach route than the exercise planners had predicted. Viper 2, turn left heading 310, increase speed to military power, I commanded, adjusting our intercept course based on the electronic detection. It was a calculated risk because I was committing both aircraft to a specific vector based on limited information. But sometimes that's what combat required. The next few minutes were tense as we raced across the desert sky at maximum speed, burning fuel at an alarming rate, but knowing that time was more critical than efficiency. I continued to scan for additional electronic signatures while maintaining the intercept heading, hoping that my initial detection had been accurate. Viper 1, I've got intermittent radar contact, bearing 315, range approximately 40 miles. Captain Stevens reported. His radar had briefly penetrated the F-35 stealth, probably due to our changing geometry and the target aircraft's maneuvering. Roger, Viper 2. Maintain contact and call out any changes, I replied, feeling the first surge of confidence since the exercise had begun. We were finally in the hunt, but Major Kim was an experienced pilot who wouldn't make it easy for us. F-35 began a series of evasive maneuvers, using its superior agility and electronic warfare capabilities to break radar lock and disappear from our sensors. I could almost picture Major Kim in his cockpit, smiling as he demonstrated the technological superiority of his aircraft against our older F-16S. But technology wasn't everything in air-to-air combat. Pilot skill, tactical awareness, and the ability to think creatively under pressure were still crucial factors. I had been flying fighters for 12 years, and I had learned that sometimes the best response to advanced technology was old-fashioned. Flying skill and unconventional tactics. Viper 2, brake right and descend to 15,000 feet. I'm going high, I instructed, splitting our formation to cover multiple altitude bands. If Major Kim thought he could simply outmaneuver us with superior technology, he was about to learn that experience and determination could still make a difference. The separation maneuver forced the F-35 to choose which aircraft to engage first, revealing its position as it maneuvered to maintain advantage over both targets. It was a classic fighter pilot technique, using multiple aircraft to force the enemy into a no-win situation where any action revealed information about their position and intentions. The tactical situation deteriorated rapidly when Major Kim executed a maneuver that demonstrated just how outclassed we were technologically. Using the F-35's advanced sensors and stealth capabilities, he managed to position himself behind Captain Stevens, without either of us detecting the approach. The first indication we had of his location was when Stevens' aircraft lit up with simulated missile lock warnings. Viper 2 is spiked. Defensive maneuvers. Stevens called out, his voice tight with stress as he threw his F-16 into a series of evasive turns. In a real combat situation, he would have been shot down before he even knew he was being targeted. The exercise rules allowed him to continue flying, but the message was clear. Our older aircraft were hopelessly outmatched. I immediately turned to assist my wingman, but Major Kim had anticipated this response. As soon as I committed to helping Stevens, the F-35 disappeared again, using its stealth technology to vanish from our radar screens. When it reappeared 30 seconds later, it was in a perfect position to engage my aircraft from an angle that made defensive maneuvering nearly impossible. Viper 1, you're locked up, came Major Kim's calm voice over the radio. In a real fight, you'd be down too. The simulated engagement continued for another 10 minutes, with the F-35 consistently outmaneuvering and outpositioning our F-16s. Every time we thought we had gained an advantage, Major Kim would use his aircraft's superior technology to turn the tables. It was a masterful display of how advanced capabilities could overcome numerical superiority and pilot experience. Back at Blackwater's control tower, I could imagine the scene unfolding as Senator Hayes and her delegation watched the exercise. Through their headsets, General Stone was probably explaining how this demonstrated the importance of maintaining technological superiority over potential adversaries, while the Pentagon officials took notes about the performance gap between different generations of aircraft. But there was another conversation happening that I couldn't hear. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison was providing his own commentary to a smaller group of senior officers, using the exercise results as evidence for his long-held beliefs about pilot selection and training priorities. What you're seeing here is exactly what I've been warning about, Harrison said to Colonel David Walsh, the wing's deputy commander. When we prioritize diversity over merit, we end up with pilots who can't handle advanced scenarios. Captain Rodriguez has all the right credentials on paper, but when it comes to real performance under pressure, the results speak for themselves. Colonel Walsh nodded thoughtfully, watching as my F-16 struggled to maintain position against the superior F-35. The technology gap is significant, but shouldn't experience count for something? Rodriguez has combat deployments and an excellent service record. Flying close air support in Afghanistan is different from air-to-air combat against a peer adversary, Harrison replied. This exercise is showing us what happens when political considerations override operational requirements. We're setting these pilots up for failure and potentially endangering national security in the process. The conversation was exactly what Harrison had hoped to achieve. By designing an exercise that highlighted technological superiority over pilot skill, he was creating a narrative that diversity initiatives were weakening military readiness. The fact that no F-16 pilot could realistically compete against an F-35 in this scenario was irrelevant to his broader argument. Senator Hayes was asking her own pointed questions to General Stone as the exercise continued. General, what would happen if Captain Rodriguez were flying the F-35 instead of Major Kim? Would the results be different? It was a question that cut to the heart of the real issue. The exercise wasn't actually testing pilot capability. It was demonstrating equipment superiority. But General Stone wasn't about to acknowledge that distinction in front of a Senate committee chairwoman who held considerable influence over military budgets. Senator, the F-35 is our most advanced fighter, and we assign our most experienced pilots to fly it, Stone replied carefully. Major Kim has over 500 hours in the Lightning II and has completed advanced training programs that prepare him for exactly this type of scenario. And Captain Rodriguez? What's her experience level with advanced aircraft? Hayes pressed. Stone glanced at his notes, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the questioning. Captain Rodriguez is a qualified pilot with extensive experience in the F-16. However, transition training to fifth-generation aircraft requires significant time and resources that we allocate based on operational priorities and pilot seniority. The senator's expression suggested she understood the underlying dynamics at play. So what we're really seeing is a comparison between your newest technology operated by your most experienced pilots versus older equipment flown by newer personnel. Is that an accurate assessment? Before Stone could answer, Master Sergeant Williams' voice crackled over the radio with an urgent transmission that changed everything. All aircraft, this is Blackwater Control. We have an unidentified contact bearing 030 degrees, range 80 miles, altitude 35,000 feet, speed 600 knots. This is not part of the exercise. Repeat, this is not part of the exercise. The training scenario immediately ceased as every pilot and controller focused on the new threat. An unidentified aircraft approaching at high speed from the northeast met a potential violation of restricted airspace, or worse, a genuine hostile contact. Viper flight, terminate exercise and return to base immediately, came the instruction from Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, who had taken over radio communications from the control tower, but I wasn't ready to comply with that order. My radar was already locked onto the approaching contact, and what I was seeing didn't match any known civilian or military traffic pattern. The aircraft was traveling too fast and too high for normal aviation, and it was heading directly toward Blackwater's restricted airspace. Control, Viper 1 has radar contact on the unknown aircraft. Request permission to investigate, I transmitted, knowing that this was exactly the kind of situation that required immediate action rather than committee discussion. Negative, Viper 1. Return to base immediately. F-35s will handle the intercept, Harrison responded, clearly wanting to keep the more advanced aircraft in charge of any real-world situation. But Major Kim's F-35 was at the far end of the exercise area, nearly 100 miles away from the approaching contact. By the time he could reposition and climb to intercept altitude, the unknown aircraft would already be over sensitive military installations. Someone needed to respond immediately, and my F-16 was the closest aircraft to the threat. Control. Viper 1 is closest to intercept. I can be there in 4 minutes, I persisted, already turning toward the contact and pushing my throttles to maximum power. The radio went silent for several seconds as Harrison consulted with higher authority. Finally, his voice came back, tight with reluctance. Viper 1, you are cleared to investigate the unknown contact. Maintain safe distance and report all observations. Do not engage without explicit authorization. The unknown aircraft wasn't responding to any radio calls on emergency frequencies, and its flight profile was becoming increasingly concerning. As I closed the distance at maximum speed, my radar painted a clear picture of something that shouldn't exist in American airspace. A sleek, angular aircraft unlike anything in our current inventory, flying at speeds and altitudes that suggested military capabilities far beyond civilian aviation. Control, Viper 1 has visual contact on unknown aircraft, I reported, struggling to process what I was seeing through my cockpit canopy. This is definitely not civilian traffic. Aircraft appears to be military configuration, unknown type. No visible national markings. The response from Blackwater Control came immediately, but it wasn't Lieutenant Colonel Harrison's voice. General Stone himself had taken over communications, and his tone carried an urgency that suggested the situation had escalated far beyond a simple airspace violation. Viper 1, describe the aircraft in detail. How many engines, what configuration, any weapons visible? Stone demanded. I pulled closer to the unknown aircraft, maintaining a safe distance while trying to gather as much intelligence as possible. What I saw made my blood run cold. The aircraft was clearly designed for stealth and high-speed operations, with swept wings, angular surfaces, and engine configurations that suggested advanced propulsion technology. Most alarming were the external hardpoints that appeared to be carrying some type of ordnance. Control. This aircraft appears to be carrying external stores, possibly missiles or reconnaissance equipment. Configuration is consistent with a strike aircraft or advanced interceptor. Still no response to radio calls on any frequency. Back in Blackwater's control tower, chaos was erupting as the full implications of the situation became clear. Senator Hayes and her delegation were witnessing a potential national security incident unfolding in real time, with their diversity initiative assessment suddenly becoming irrelevant compared to an immediate threat to American airspace. General, what exactly are we looking at here? Senator Hayes asked, her voice cutting through the tension in the control room. Ma'am, we're not entirely sure, Stone admitted, something he would never have said under normal circumstances. This aircraft doesn't match any known configuration in our threat databases. It could be a new foreign design conducting unauthorized reconnaissance, or possibly something even more serious. Master Sergeant Williams was working frantically at her radar console, coordinating with NORAD and other defense networks to determine the origin and intent of the mysterious aircraft. Sir, we've got confirmation from multiple radar sites. This contact appeared suddenly about 15 minutes ago, approximately 200 miles northeast of here. No flight plan filed, no transponder signal, and it's been maintaining course directly toward our restricted airspace. The implications were staggering. An unknown military aircraft had penetrated deep into American airspace without detection until it was almost on top of one of the country's most sensitive military installations. Either U.S. air defense systems had failed catastrophically, or they were dealing with technology that could evade the most sophisticated Detection networks in the world. Major Kim's voice crackled over the radio as his F-35 raced toward the intercept area. Control, Ghost Lead is approximately 6 minutes from contact. Request permission to take over the intercept. But 6 minutes might as well have been 6 hours in a rapidly developing situation. The unknown aircraft was already turning toward what appeared to be a reconnaissance run over Blackwater's most classified facilities, including the experimental aircraft hangars and the underground command center that housed critical defense communications equipment. Viper 1, this is Control. General Stone's voice carried a weight of responsibility that few military commanders ever have to bear. You are authorized to take all necessary actions to prevent that aircraft from overflying classified installations. Rules of engagement are now weapons-free. Repeat, weapons-free. The authorization to use deadly force against an unidentified aircraft over American soil was unprecedented in peacetime operations. It meant that General Stone was convinced this represented a genuine threat to national security, not just an airspace violation or navigation error. I armed my weapon systems and moved into an intercept position, trying to force the unknown aircraft to change course through positioning rather than immediate engagement. The pilot of the foreign aircraft was clearly skilled, maintaining precise formation flying that suggested military training while continuing toward the base's most sensitive areas. Unknown aircraft, this is United States Air Force, you are in violation of restricted airspace. Turn away immediately or you will be fired upon. I transmitted on emergency frequencies, knowing that the message was being heard not just by the intruder, but by every military installation. Within 500 miles, for the first time since the intercept began, the unknown aircraft responded. But instead of words, the response came in the form of aggressive maneuvering that brought the foreign plane directly toward my F-16. The pilot was either trying to intimidate me into backing down or positioning for an attack run against my aircraft. The next few seconds unfolded in the kind of slow-motion clarity that comes during moments of extreme stress. The unknown aircraft began what appeared to be a targeting run, its nose swinging toward my position in a way that suggested hostile intent. Every instinct developed through years of combat training told me that I was about to be fired upon by an enemy aircraft over American soil, but as I prepared to engage, something unexpected happened. My radar warning receiver suddenly lit up with multiple missile lock signals, but they weren't coming from the aircraft in front of me. They were coming from ground-based air defense systems that had just come online around Blackwater Air Force Base. The unknown aircraft had flown directly into a trap. While I had been conducting the visual intercept, ground-based radar operators had been quietly activating hidden surface-to-air missile batteries that ringed the base's most classified facilities. The foreign pilot had been so focused on evading my F-16 that he hadn't detected the much more dangerous threat from below. Viper 1, this is Control. Break away immediately. Ground defenses are engaging the target. I pulled my aircraft into a steep climb just as multiple missiles launched from concealed positions around the base. The unknown aircraft tried desperately to evade, demonstrating flight characteristics that confirmed it was far more advanced than anything in the public inventory. But even the most sophisticated aircraft couldn't outmaneuver multiple missiles fired from different angles. The explosion lit up the desert sky like a miniature sun, sending debris raining down across several square miles of restricted military territory. Whatever secrets that aircraft had been carrying were now scattered across the Nevada landscape. But at least they hadn't made it into hostile hands. As I circled the crash site at a safe distance, reporting coordinates and debris patterns to ground recovery teams, I realized that everything about this day had just changed. The diversity assessment that had seemed so important an hour ago was now completely irrelevant compared to the questions raised by an advanced foreign aircraft penetrating American airspace. The emergency response at Blackwater Air Force Base was unlike anything the installation had experienced in its 50-year history. Within minutes of the aircraft's destruction, the entire base went into lockdown as specialized recovery teams prepared to secure the crash site and analyze whatever remained of the mysterious intruder. Landed my F-16 to find the flight line swarming with personnel I'd never seen before. Men and women in civilian clothes with earpieces and serious expressions had taken over sections of the base operations center, while military police established a security perimeter that extended far beyond the normal restricted areas. Whatever had just happened was being treated as a potential act of war. Captain Rodriguez, report to the operations center immediately, came the instruction over the base public address system. As I walked across the tarmac, still wearing my flight suit and carrying my helmet, I could see Senator Hayes and her delegation being escorted to a secure briefing room under heavy guard. Their diversity assessment visit had just become a front-row seat to a national security crisis. General Stone was waiting for me in a conference room, filled with people I didn't recognize. There were Air Force officers with intelligence insignia, civilians who were obviously from alphabet agencies, and a stern-faced woman in a Navy uniform who introduced herself as Admiral Rebecca Torres from the Pentagon Special Access Programs Office. Captain Rodriguez, your actions during the intercept may have prevented a significant intelligence breach. Admiral Torres began, consulting a folder thick with classified documents. We need a complete debrief of everything you observed during the engagement. For the next 2 hours, I provided detailed accounts of the unknown aircraft's capabilities, flight characteristics, and apparent mission profile. The debriefing team asked technical questions that suggested they had some idea of what we had encountered, but weren't sharing that information with me. The aircraft's stealth characteristics were unlike anything I've seen. I explained to the assembled intelligence officers. It appeared on radar intermittently, suggesting active stealth technology rather than just passive design features. The pilot demonstrated familiarity with our airspace and seemed to know exactly where our most sensitive facilities were located. One of the civilian analysts leaned forward. Captain, in your professional opinion, was this aircraft conducting reconnaissance, or was it preparing for some type of attack? It was a question that had been troubling me since the engagement ended. Based on the flight profile and the external stores I observed, I believe it was conducting detailed reconnaissance of our classified facilities. The pilot seemed more interested in gathering intelligence than engaging in combat. Admiral Torres made notes in her folder before asking the most disturbing question of all. Captain, how long do you estimate that aircraft was in our airspace before you detected it? The implications were terrifying. If an advanced foreign aircraft could penetrate American airspace undetected and conduct reconnaissance missions over classified military installations, it represented a catastrophic failure of our air defense systems. Ma'am, based on its flight profile and the fact that it appeared to know exactly where it was going, I suspect it may have been operating in our airspace for some time before we detected it. Possibly hours, maybe even longer. The room fell silent as the intelligence officers processed this assessment. If I was correct, it meant that foreign powers had been conducting surveillance missions over American military installations with impunity, gathering intelligence that could compromise national security at the highest levels. Meanwhile, the crash site investigation was revealing information that made the situation even more alarming. Preliminary analysis of the debris suggested that the aircraft incorporated technology that was decades ahead of known foreign capabilities. Materials analysis showed composite structures that shouldn't have been possible with current manufacturing techniques, and engine components that suggested propulsion systems far more advanced than anything in the American inventory. General Stone, Admiral Torres said during a brief break in my debriefing, we need to discuss the security implications of today's events. If foreign powers have achieved this level of technological advancement without our knowledge, it represents a fundamental shift in the global balance of power. But there was another conversation happening simultaneously that I wasn't part of. In a separate briefing room, Senator Hayes was receiving classified briefings about the broader implications of what had just occurred. The aircraft that had been shot down wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a pattern of increasingly sophisticated intrusions that suggested a coordinated intelligence-gathering operation. Senator, what you witnessed today is just the tip of the iceberg, General Stone explained to Hayes and her delegation. We've been tracking increased activity by unknown aircraft for the past 6 months, but this is the first time we've been able to engage one directly. The senator's questions were sharp and focused. General, if these incursions have been happening for months, why haven't you been able to stop them before now? Ma'am, the technology involved is unlike anything we've encountered. These aircraft can evade our most sophisticated detection systems and outperform our best interceptors. Today's success was largely due to Captain Rodriguez's quick thinking and tactical awareness. It was a statement that fundamentally changed the narrative about the day's events. Instead of being a demonstration of how diversity initiatives weakened military capability, the incident had become evidence of how unconventional thinking and adaptability could overcome technological disadvantages. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, who had been conspicuously quiet during the emergency response, finally found his voice during a planning session for enhanced air defense procedures. Admiral, with respect, we were fortunate today. If Captain Rodriguez hadn't been in the right position at the right time, that aircraft could have completed its reconnaissance mission and escaped. Colonel, that's exactly my point, Admiral Torres replied. Captain Rodriguez's performance today demonstrates the importance of having pilots who can think creatively under pressure. Her decision to pursue the intercept, despite orders to return to base, may have prevented a significant intelligence compromise. The praise was gratifying, but I was more concerned about the broader implications of what we'd discovered. If foreign powers could deploy aircraft with such advanced capabilities, it raised fundamental questions about American air superiority and the effectiveness of our current defense systems. The debris analysis continued throughout the night, with specialized teams working to understand the technology that had been employed against us. Initial reports suggested that the aircraft incorporated stealth technology, advanced materials, and propulsion systems that represented a quantum leap beyond known foreign capabilities. Captain Rodriguez, Admiral Torres approached me as the debriefing session concluded. I want you to know that your actions today will be recognized at the highest levels. You may have prevented a catastrophic intelligence breach, but recognition wasn't what mattered most to me. What mattered was ensuring that American airspace remained secure against increasingly sophisticated threats. The diversity assessment that had brought Senator Hayes to Blackwater seemed trivial compared to the real challenges facing our national defense. As the immediate crisis began to wind down, I realized that everything about military aviation was about to change. The comfortable assumptions about American technological superiority had been shattered by an unknown aircraft that could outperform our best systems. Whatever came next would require new thinking, new tactics, and new approaches to defending American airspace. The secure conference room at Blackwater had been transformed into a crisis command center, with multiple screens displaying satellite imagery, radar tracks, and classified intelligence reports from across the globe. Admiral Torres had assembled what she called a fusion cell of experts from various agencies to analyze the implications of the day's events and develop immediate response options. Ladies and gentlemen, what happened here today is not an isolated incident, Admiral Torres announced to the assembled group, which now included senior officers from NORAD, representatives from the CIA and NSA, and specialists from the Defense Intelligence Agency. We have confirmation of similar intrusions at 3 other strategic installations over the past month. The revelation sent a chill through the room. If multiple advanced aircraft had been conducting reconnaissance missions over America's most classified military facilities, it represented an intelligence catastrophe of unprecedented proportions. The scope of the potential compromise was staggering. General Stone leaned forward in his chair. "Admiral, are you saying that foreign powers have been conducting systematic surveillance of our strategic assets?" "That's exactly what I'm saying, General. The aircraft that Captain Rodriguez intercepted today was part of a coordinated intelligence gathering operation that has been ongoing for at least 6 months. We believe the objective was to map our defensive capabilities and identify vulnerabilities in our most sensitive installations." Senator Hayes, who had been quietly observing the briefing, finally spoke up. "Admiral, what country has the capability to deploy this kind of technology? Russia? China?" Admiral Torres exchanged glances with one of the civilian analysts before responding. "Senator, that's where this situation becomes even more concerning. Based on preliminary analysis of the debris, this technology doesn't match any known foreign development programs. We're dealing with capabilities that are significantly beyond what our intelligence estimates suggested was possible. The implications were terrifying. Either American intelligence had catastrophically underestimated foreign technological development, or they were dealing with technology that had been developed in complete secrecy by an unknown actor. Both possibilities represented fundamental failures of the intelligence apparatus that was supposed to protect national security. Dr. Sarah Chun, a propulsion specialist from the Air Force Research Laboratory, had been examining engine components recovered from the crash site. "Admiral, the turbine designs we're seeing incorporate materials and manufacturing techniques that shouldn't exist outside of highly classified research programs. Either someone has achieved breakthrough advances we're not aware of, or this technology has been stolen from our own black projects. The possibility that American technology had been compromised and turned against the United States added another layer of complexity to an already dire situation. If foreign powers had gained access to classified research programs, it could explain how they had achieved such dramatic technological advances so quickly. Meanwhile, Master Sergeant Williams had been coordinating with radar facilities across the western United States to reconstruct the complete flight profile of the intercepted aircraft. Her findings were disturbing. "Admiral, we've been able to track this aircraft's approach route using data from multiple radar sites," Williams reported. "It appears to have originated from a point approximately 800 miles west of here, over the Pacific Ocean. The aircraft maintained a flight profile that kept it below most radar coverage until it began its final approach to Blackwater, the Pacific. Origin points suggested that the aircraft had either been launched from a ship or had flown an extremely long-distance mission from a foreign base. Both possibilities indicated a level of operational capability that exceeded previous threat assessments." "Sergeant, what was the total time this aircraft spent in American airspace?" Admiral Torres asked. "Ma'am, based on radar correlation and flight path analysis, we estimate the aircraft was over American territory for approximately 4 hours before Captain Rodriguez intercepted it. During that time, it conducted what appears to be systematic reconnaissance of multiple classified facilities. 4 hours of undetected flight over the most sensitive military installations in the United States represented a complete failure of air defense systems that were supposed to be impenetrable. The fact that the intrusion had only been detected by chance during a training exercise raised fundamental questions about how many other missions had been conducted without any American awareness. Senator Hayes was taking detailed notes throughout the briefing, clearly understanding that this incident would require immediate congressional attention and possibly emergency funding for enhanced air defense systems. "Admiral, what's being done to prevent future intrusions?" "Senator, we're implementing immediate changes to our air defense posture. All strategic installations are going to enhanced alert status, and we're deploying additional radar coverage to fill gaps that these aircraft have been exploiting. But the most significant change was already happening in the room itself. The careful hierarchy and bureaucratic processes that normally governed military decision-making had been swept aside by the urgency of the crisis. Officers who would normally have been excluded from high-level strategic discussions were being asked for their input and expertise. Captain Rodriguez, Admiral Torres addressed me directly. Your tactical analysis during today's intercept was exceptional. I want you to work with our intelligence team to develop new intercept procedures for dealing with advanced stealth aircraft. It was an unprecedented assignment for a captain, but the circumstances demanded unconventional approaches. The traditional methods of air defense had failed catastrophically, and new thinking was required to address threats that exceeded previous assumptions about enemy capabilities. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, who had been noticeably quiet since the crisis began, finally found an opportunity to speak. Admiral, while Captain Rodriguez performed well today, we need to consider whether our current pilot training programs are adequate for these new threats. Perhaps we should focus on our most experienced personnel for these critical missions. It was a last attempt to maintain the status quo and minimize the significance of what had happened. But Admiral Torres wasn't interested in preserving existing hierarchies when national security was at stake. Colonel, what I saw today was a pilot who recognized an unusual situation, made correct tactical decisions under pressure, and prevented a significant intelligence compromise. Those are exactly the qualities we need in our interceptor pilots, regardless of their background or seniority. The rebuke was delivered in professional terms, but its meaning was clear. The old assumptions about pilot selection and mission assignment were no longer relevant when facing threats that required adaptability and creative thinking rather than just technical proficiency. Dr. Chun approached me with preliminary analysis. Reports from the crash site. Captain, the pilot of that aircraft was extremely skilled. The evasive maneuvers and tactical awareness demonstrated during the intercept suggest training that rivals our own Top Gun programs. Whoever sent this mission invested significant resources in both technology and personnel. The assessment confirmed what I had suspected during the engagement. This wasn't a probe by inexperienced pilots flying advanced technology. It was a sophisticated operation conducted by highly trained professionals using equipment that exceeded American capabilities in several key areas. As the briefing continued into the evening, one thing became clear: the comfortable assumptions about American military superiority had been permanently shattered. The question now was whether the United States could adapt quickly enough to address threats that had evolved far beyond previous planning scenarios. The investigation took an unexpected turn when debris analysis revealed something that fundamentally changed everyone's understanding of what had transpired. Dr. Chun's team had been working through the night examining fragments of the mysterious aircraft, and their findings were about to reshape the entire narrative of the day's events. "Admiral, we need to speak privately," Dr. Chun said, her voice carrying an urgency that silenced the entire command center. She gestured toward a secure side room, where only the highest-level personnel were permitted. The expression on her face suggested that whatever she had discovered was going to complicate an already complex situation. 5 minutes later, Admiral Torres emerged from the private briefing looking pale and shaken. She immediately ordered all non-essential personnel to leave the command center, reducing the group to only the most senior officials and cleared personnel. Even Senator Hayes was asked to step out temporarily, an unprecedented move that suggested the classification level had just been elevated dramatically. "What I'm about to tell you cannot leave this room under any circumstances," Admiral Torres began, her voice barely above a whisper. The aircraft that Captain Rodriguez intercepted was not foreign technology. It was one of ours. The statement hit the room like a physical blow. General Stone was the first to find his voice. "Admiral, that's impossible. We don't have anything in our inventory that matches what we observed today." "General, Dr. Chian's analysis is conclusive. The materials, manufacturing techniques, and even some of the component serial numbers match classified research programs that have been under development for the past 5 years. This aircraft was built in American facilities using American technology. The implications were staggering and terrifying. If an advanced American prototype had been conducting unauthorized reconnaissance missions over classified military installations, it meant that either the program had been compromised by foreign intelligence services, or there was a rogue operation being conducted by American personnel. Dr. Chun returned to the command center carrying a sealed evidence bag containing what appeared to be a damaged electronic component. "This is a navigation processor that we removed from the wreckage. The encryption protocols and software architecture are consistent with our most classified flight systems. There's no way foreign intelligence could have replicated this level of detail." Master Sergeant Williams had been quietly monitoring communications channels throughout the crisis, and she now reported another disturbing development. "Admiral, I've been tracking the radio frequencies that aircraft was using during the intercept. The encryption keys match those used by a special access program that I'm not cleared to know the details of." The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, but the picture they revealed was more frightening than anyone had anticipated. An American special access program had apparently been conducting unauthorized operations over domestic military installations, using technology so classified that even senior Air Force officers weren't aware of its existence. Admiral Torres made a secure phone call to Washington that lasted nearly 30 minutes. When she returned, her expression was grim. "I've spoken with the Secretary of Defense and the Director of National Intelligence. What we're dealing with is a compartmented program that has apparently gone its authorized parameters." The euphemism was clear to everyone in the room. A black program had gone rogue, conducting operations that exceeded its legal authority and potentially threatened national security. The aircraft that had been shot down wasn't an enemy intruder. It was an American asset that had been misused by personnel who had exceeded their mandate. "Admiral," I asked, "does this mean I shot down an American aircraft?" "Captain, you followed proper procedures and engaged what appeared to be a hostile aircraft in restricted airspace. The fault lies with whoever authorized that aircraft to conduct unauthorized reconnaissance missions, not with you." But the reassurance didn't eliminate the troubling implications of what had occurred. If American special programs were conducting domestic surveillance operations without proper oversight, it represented a fundamental breakdown in the checks and balances that were supposed to prevent intelligence agencies from spying on their own military. General Stone was struggling to process the revelation. "Admiral, if this aircraft was conducting surveillance of our own installations, what was it looking for? What kind of intelligence would justify this level of risk?" "General, that's what we're going to find out. I've ordered a complete audit of all special access programs that have aircraft capabilities. We're going to determine who authorized these missions and why they thought domestic surveillance was necessary." The investigation was about to expand far beyond Blackwater Air Force Base. Teams of investigators would be dispatched to facilities across the country to determine the scope of the unauthorized operations and identify the personnel responsible for exceeding their authority. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison, who had been silent throughout the revelation, finally spoke up. "Admiral, what does this mean for the pilots and personnel who were involved in today's events? Are we going to be subject to investigation?" "Colonel, everyone who participated in today's events will be debriefed and their actions reviewed. However, all evidence suggests that base personnel followed proper procedures when confronted with an unidentified aircraft in restricted airspace. The aftermath of the discovery was swift and dramatic. Within hours, senior officials from multiple intelligence Agencies arrived at Blackwater to take control of the investigation. The base was placed under a security lockdown that would last for weeks as investigators worked to determine the full scope of the unauthorized program. Senator Hayes was eventually briefed on the basic facts of the situation, though many details remained classified even from congressional oversight. Her diversity assessment visit had uncovered a scandal that would eventually lead to congressional hearings and significant reforms in how special access programs were monitored and controlled. The personal implications were profound. Instead of being criticized for my performance during the diversity assessment, I was being praised for preventing what could have been a significant intelligence breach. The unauthorized surveillance program had been attempting to gather information about air defense capabilities and response procedures, data that could have been used to plan future operations against American installations. Captain Rodriguez, Admiral Torres, said during a private conversation, "Your quick thinking and decisive action may have prevented a much larger crisis. If that aircraft had completed its mission and escaped, we might never have discovered the existence of this rogue program." The investigation eventually revealed that a small group of intelligence personnel had convinced themselves that domestic surveillance was necessary to identify security vulnerabilities at strategic installations. They had used their access to classified technology to conduct unauthorized reconnaissance missions, believing that they were serving national security interests. The personnel involved were arrested and charged with multiple federal crimes, including unauthorized use of classified technology and conducting surveillance operations without proper legal authority. The special access program they had compromised was terminated, and new oversight procedures were implemented to prevent similar incidents. But perhaps the most significant outcome was the recognition that unconventional thinking and diverse perspectives were essential for national security. The incident had demonstrated that fresh approaches and different viewpoints could identify threats and solutions that traditional methods might miss. "Captain," Admiral Torres told me as the immediate crisis wound down, "this incident has taught us that we need officers who can think outside established patterns and respond creatively to unexpected situations. Those are exactly the qualities that will be required to address future security challenges." The statement represented a fundamental shift in how military leadership viewed diversity and inclusion initiatives. Instead of being seen as political correctness that compromised operational effectiveness, they were now understood as essential components of national security in an era of rapidly evolving threats. 6 months after the incident that changed everything at Blackwater Air Force Base, I found myself standing before a packed auditorium at the Pentagon, preparing to address a gathering of senior military officials, congressional representatives, and defense contractors. The speech I was about to give would mark the culmination of investigations, reforms, and recognition that had transformed not just my career, but military policies across all branches of service. The investigation into the rogue special access program that uncovered a network of unauthorized operations that extended far beyond the single aircraft I had intercepted. Congressional hearings revealed that the program had been conducting domestic surveillance for over 2 years, gathering intelligence on military installations, defense contractors, and even congressional facilities. The scope of the illegal activity was so extensive that it triggered the largest internal security review in military history. Senator Hayes had become one of the most vocal advocates for the reforms that emerged from the scandal. Her diversity assessment visit had inadvertently exposed a threat to constitutional governance that might have continued indefinitely without detection. "What Captain Rodriguez demonstrated that day," she said during her opening remarks, "was that diverse perspectives and unconventional approaches are not just beneficial for military effectiveness, they're essential for protecting our democratic institutions." "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, looking out at an audience that included some of the most powerful people in the defense establishment. 6 months ago, many of you would have described me as a diversity hire who was taking up space that could have been filled by a more qualified candidate. Today, I want to talk about why that thinking is not just wrong, but dangerous for our national security. The aircraft I had intercepted wasn't just conducting unauthorized surveillance. It was testing our assumptions about threats and responses. The rogue program succeeded for years because it operated within the boundaries of conventional thinking. They assumed that our air defense systems would follow standard procedures and that our personnel would respond predictably to unusual situations. General Stone, who is now one of my strongest supporters, nodded approvingly from the front row. The transformation in his attitude had been remarkable. He had testified before Congress that the Blackwater incident had convinced him that diversity wasn't just about fairness, it was about operational superiority. Lieutenant Colonel Harrison approached me during the break, his attitude completely transformed since Blackwater. "Major Rodriguez," he said, using my new rank, "I owe you an apology. I spent years believing that maintaining standards meant preserving traditional approaches. What you showed me is that real standards are about results, not conformity." The reforms that emerged were comprehensive and far-reaching. New oversight procedures were implemented for all special access programs. Promotion policies were revised to emphasize performance over traditional career patterns. Most importantly, military leadership training now included specific instruction on recognizing and eliminating unconscious bias. As I concluded my presentation, I realized that the real victory wasn't personal recognition or career advancement. It was the knowledge that future generations of military personnel would be judged on their capabilities and contributions rather than whether they fit traditional expectations. The diversity assessment that had seemed so threatening 6 months ago had become irrelevant, replaced by a much more compelling demonstration of why different perspectives strengthen rather than weaken our military. Sometimes the most powerful arguments aren't written in policy papers or congressional testimony, but in the split-second decisions that determine whether freedom survives or fails. That lesson, more than any individual achievement, was worth fighting for. The most unexpected recognition came 2 years later when I received a call from Colonel Sarah Mitchell, my former commanding officer who had originally recommended me for Blackwater. She was now running the Air Force's newest program, the Unconventional Threats Response Unit, specifically designed to counter emerging challenges that didn't fit traditional military models. "Elena, I need someone who can think outside the box and isn't afraid to question orders when the situation demands it," she said. "Interested in commanding your own squadron?" Today, I lead a team of pilots from every imaginable background, former enlisted personnel who earned their wings, international exchange officers, and yes, plenty of people who were once dismissed as diversity hires. We fly the most advanced aircraft in the Air Force inventory, and our mission is to expect the unexpected. Last month, we successfully intercepted 3 more unauthorized aircraft, this time genuinely foreign, using tactics that no traditional squadron would have attempted. The Pentagon now calls us their ace in the hole for situations that require unconventional solutions. General Stone, who retired last year, sent me a handwritten note that I keep framed in my office. Captain Rodriguez proved that the military's greatest strength isn't our weapons or technology. It's our ability to find excellence in unexpected places. They still call it peak diversity at some installations, but now they mean it as the highest compliment possible. That's the power of standing your ground when others doubt you. Have you ever been underestimated because of who you are, only to surprise everyone with what you could accomplish? Share your stories in the comments below. We love hearing how our viewers have overcome skepticism and proved their worth. If this story of quiet strength and unexpected heroism resonated with you, hit that subscribe button and join our community of people who believe that excellence comes in all forms. What challenges have you faced that seemed impossible until you found your own unconventional solution? Ring that notification bell and let us know where you're watching from. We have viewers from over 50 countries who inspire us every day with their own stories of perseverance. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most important battles are won not with superior firepower, but with the courage to think differently when it matters most.